Okay, so in this lesson we're going to be talking about storage, and we're looking at the features of storage devices that affect their performance and the performance of a computer system. So here is, in terms of storage, is a ranking of how fast they are. So registers are ways of being able to store things temporarily on the CPU, and so we mentioned before cache on the CPU, so that's similar to registers, so they're very fast because we know that the CPU is very fast. So that's the fastest form of storage, as it were. And then in terms of temporary storage of stuff, and then comes the memory, the main memory, which is RAM. And after that we have the solid state drive, and then the hard disk drive, and then any removable storage such as the optical drives, such as the the DVD, as well as the Blu-ray and CDs. Those will be a lot slower. Okay, so how does the actual hard disk work? Now we know that the hard disk drive is a long-term storage. So if you want to store anything on the computer and you want it to be remaining when the power goes off, we know we can't store it in RAM because RAM is volatile, and we can't store to ROM either because ROM is just used for booting up the computer. So we would need to store it somewhere else, and there's where we store things into the hard disk drive. Now the hard disk drive, in terms of how it works, is that it has a spinning disk. So this here is a metal disk, and it's a magnetized surface, and this spins at very fast pace. And it also has this arm here which rotates in and out of the disk to be able to read from the different sectors of the disk. Okay, so if the file was here at the corner, the arm will come out and it would read the content there, and if it needs to go back inside, it would also go back and forth. And then once it reads and writes from those track sectors, it does so to the disk controller, and then the controller then interrupts the CPU to say that I want to now move the data that I've got here to main memory. We know that the CPU can only work directly with the main memory, so CPU can only work directly with RAM because the hard disk drive is too slow for it, and so anything that we want to work with gets copied from the controller here onto RAM, and then that content can then be processed by the CPU. Okay, if you want to know a bit more about how the hard disk drive works, please watch this video. But that's for, in terms of your exam, that's what the main thing you need to know, that there is a controller, and that controller is what's going to interrupt the CPU to be able to move data back and forth to the main memory. Right, so other factors that affect the performance then of a storage device. So we have the rotational latency. So this depends on the spin speed, as in how fast the disk is actually spinning in the first place. But the word latency is effectively the delay between something happening and then getting the expected outcome. So in this case, it will be the delay that might be caused in reading or writing due to the speed at which the disk can spin. So that's just, if it spins very fast, then we might have a reduced latency, but depends on where the file is and what we're trying to read. Right, and then seek time. So that is depends on the density of the track. Yeah, so how condensed the track of the data is on the actual surface, and of course this means that it takes time to locate the particular file within that sector. So the seek time, as in how long it takes us to be able to gain that file that we're trying to get. Right, and then this relates to the data transfer, and so this relates to the speed at which we're able to transfer the information from the disk surface to the controller, which we mentioned previously. And so the faster that is, the faster we're able to get that data onto the main memory, and then the faster the CPU can then process it. So if the data transfer is low, then it would mean that the CPU has to wait a lot longer before it can process the content. And then fragmentation is something that can happen when the disk, so if I go back to this slide here previously, so if some of the file is stored here, and another part of the file is stored here, another part of the file is stored here, all of that content would take a lot longer to read, because that means the data has become fragmented over the disk, so it's become in different parts of the disk. And so fragmentation is something that we don't want to happen, but we can overcome it with something known as defragmentation. But if the disk gets fragmented, basically means that it will take more time to be able to read the file. Yeah. So because it's separated on the hard disk drive. Right, disk cache. This is something else that can affect the performance of your hard disk drive. So disk cache is the idea of being able to temporarily use a little bit of memory in the RAM or the hard disk drive itself to hold data likely to be needed next, or data that's frequently used. Okay, so the idea of that is that it again would reduce the length of time it takes for you to be able to retrieve frequently used data on the hard disk drive, and it helps you to be able to read ahead as well as read behind. So it helps you to be able to, or it helps the controller to not have to keep going back to the disk to get that data. Okay, I didn't actually finish my notes on here, but I've basically covered the content of what was there to be said. So it just helps you to be able to temporarily store some of the content that we might want to read next, or what we might have wanted to go back to. So yeah, that concludes the factors that would affect the hard disk drive.